Greetings, Earthlings. Welcome to Confessions of a Founder, where we dive deep into the stories, challenges, and triumphs of successful entrepreneurs and the lessons they've learned along the way. Each founder we feature has, in their own way, shaped business and innovation for the good of people and the planet. And today's guest is no exception. Today, I sit down with Ajay Prakash, co-founder and CEO of Rinse, a company that's building the first national brand in laundry and dry cleaning by making the washer, dryer, and trips to the dry cleaner obsolete. Prior to his 11-year tenure leading Rinse, Prakash was the COO and CFO of Humble Brands, a consumer product startup in San Francisco. He also has experience at Bonobos, Berkshire Partners, the NBA, and Bain & Company. Prakash is also currently a lecturer in management for Startup Garage, one of the Stanford Graduate School of Business's most popular classes on entrepreneurship. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and get ready for an incredible season 2. I'm so excited for you to hear who we have on deck. Ajay, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. I'm excited for your confessions as a founder.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Okay, so I think to start off, you have worn a lot of different hats and your bio has definitely changed over time. So if you can share, how did you describe yourself in interviews like this at the start of your journey with Rinse, and how do you describe yourself now?
Well, the interesting thing about the journey is that my title's been the same for 12 years as I built Rinse, and I think I've learned a lot, I've grown a lot, but I think probably how I describe myself or how I've shown up hasn't changed as much. But when I started Rinse, it was 2013, and I didn't have that many years yet as a startup founder or early executive. Had one experience or and an internship, and so probably my confidence in what I've learned and what I understand about the journey has changed over time. Because prior to business school, prior to startups, I did consulting, I did private equity. I was really a generalist, kind of getting great business experience, but hadn't really done the building. But once I started building, I loved it, and I just kept going, and so now I'm just a little bit more seasoned.
So what were some of the most formative experiences you had in your upbringing that shaped this entrepreneurial mindset of yours?
Well, I mean, I think, when you're on the entrepreneurial journey, there are so many ups and downs, and, everyone who comes in, you can be smart, you can execute well, you can have really good business acumen, good business judgment, but there's kind of an underlying resilience and grit and just like, um, you know, ability to kind of bounce back. My mom used to use the term bounce back ability. I think that really applies in the startup world because one thing I found is that I told this to my co-founder James when we started is in the startup world is you kind of get a punch in the stomach every day, right? It's just normal. We call it startupville. That's just how life is in startupville. And so the ability to manage your psyche is super important. And I think that's something that I developed very early on. I have two older brothers. Both my parents are very grounded, very wise, have a lot of great advice. My mom was a psychiatrist. She was very, focused on, was just a very patient person, always had great advice, always had great quotes to live by, words to live by that, helped me navigate and actually think about how to bounce back, how to pick myself up. And I have found that bounce back ability has been a kind of core underlying thread to my whole journey, which is that whatever the situation is, there's a challenge we're going to face. There's a wall you have to run through or you have to get around or get over. And you have to manage your psyche through that. And so I'd credit a lot of not necessarily that I grew up around entrepreneurs, but just the fact that, that idea of like resilience and bouncing back was kind of core to how my brothers and I were raised. I think that's been really helpful for me in my journey here at Rinse.
I'm excited to dive into that more and the tools and tricks that you can share with the audience. But first,
for those who maybe have never met you before, this was not your first foray into the startup world. So, can you share a little bit about your background pre Rinse and how you navigated into the startup ecosystem?
Yeah. After college, I kind of took a traditional business path. I worked at Bain Consulting. I was able to do a 6 month, what they call an externship at Bain at the NBA, working in international strategy, and I did 2 years in private equity. And so when I went to business school, I had tried consulting, I had tried private equity, I had worked in sports, I'd worked in a big company, and what I wanted to do was diversify my experiences, try something new, kind of see what got me most excited. And I was lucky to get an internship at a company called Bonobos back in my first business school summer, and it was at the time 7 people just selling pants, and it was
Wow.
super early stage, super exciting. And I went from like I really liked private equity, but I just loved the startup feel. Like it was one of these things where I could put myself in the shoes of the consumer. I could think of an idea, we could test it that day, we could implement it, a product change the next day. The pace of learning, the pace of change, all of it was just so different. And it really spoke to me. And it was also this ability to kind of wear all the different hats. And so when I left that Bonobos experience, I knew I wanted to go into the startup world. I knew I wanted to do consumer. Uh, after leaving business school, I didn't have any idea of my own. I didn't know what I wanted to do from starting my own thing, and so I got advice from a mentor that said, "Hey, if you don't have an idea of your own, the next best thing is to go learn on someone else's dime." And so I went and joined a startup as the first hire. I was the COO and CFO. The product was a natural drug-free sleep drink, so it was kind of the opposite of a 5 Hour Energy. I came in to run operations, production, all of fundraising, the financials, all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of new things for me, and it was super exciting. It was just like I'm learning new things every day. We're trying to build this product, go to market. We raised a small seed round. All of this stuff was really really exciting, and I did that for 2 years and really cut my teeth in that very very early stage of startups. And at the end of it, it didn't end the way that any of us wanted to. And when I left it, I was like, okay, I know I love startups. I know I love this early stage, but if the startup I'm in isn't gonna work out or not end the way I want it to, I at least want to be the one driving. And so that's where I decided I'm gonna start my own thing. And so I went into an exploration phase in late 2012, kind of thinking about trends, thinking about where am I passionate, where am I an expert, where is there a market opportunity, and trying to find that intersection. And I tested a bunch of different ideas, but none of them were the right idea. And there were two things that I was, piece of advice I had gotten from mentors of mine that helped me in this at this time. One was a mentor told me, "Hey, when you're in this journey, wait for the bells to go off. That's it. Just like you don't you'll know it when it happens. Just wait for the bells to go off." And I was like, okay, well, I don't know what that means. And then another one who was a successful founder had said, when you start working on ideas, make sure you're excited. And then a week later, make sure you're still excited. And then a week later, make sure you're still excited. And as you continue to build, make sure you're still excited, because if you can't maintain that excitement in the early weeks, there's no way you'll build a company for 10, 15, 20 years. And the journey, I'm 12 years in, the journey can be long. But what happened was I was working on different ideas, and I couldn't maintain the excitement. And I wasn't like able to go do the research or go talk to those customers or go like build that model. And then one day in early 2013, as I was working on different ideas, my co-founder James, who's one of my best friends from college, I've now known him for 26 years. But he came to me with an idea of doing something in dry cleaning. It fit the trends I was looking at, which was bringing technology to old school industries, removing friction from existing customer experiences. He was someone I'd always viewed as a co-founder. I'd actually decided recently in order for me to start, I needed to do it with the co-founder. I'd feel more comfortable. And he grew up in dry cleaning and had this unfair kind of advantage of understanding that. And that was when he said it, the bells went off. Like I got it. It made sense. And so that was, the start of the Rinse journey, where we started talking about it. And guess what? We kept the excitement going every week as we were digging in, and to the point where we knew we were going to do this. We jumped in, and we've been building for 12 years.
Okay, so a couple things I want to point out, because the first is, for many people listening, they're thinking about starting a startup, or they're in the process of kind of narrowing down on an idea, or maybe a little bit further into product market fit. You mentioned that you were looking at old school industries and how to transform them, versus a lot of folks now talk about, obviously, like eyes to the future. Let's go to space. Let's invest in AI. Let's invest in quantum. I love this zig or zag while everybody else is zigging. Where did that come from? And how did you, what inspired that mindset?
Yeah, well, it was two things, right? And a lot of times when you're starting a company, there's a question. The two questions to answer are why me and why now. And so the why me was I was looking at not only market opportunity and where am I excited, but it was also like where am I an expert? And the my background up to that point was very generalist. Like when I was in consulting, I worked for consumer companies or healthcare companies, industrial companies. In private equity, I did like oil and gas. I did consumer. Right? It was all over the map. And what I realized was like, what I'm an expert in? I'm an expert at working really long hours, always being too busy, never having enough time for doing things. And so I actually, when I was looking at these, it turns out a lot of the industries that would serve that need, like laundry or food delivery or things like that, were pretty old school and had not been innovated on. But that was the lens I was looking at. I was like, where can I bring a unique expertise to this situation, where like I'm solving for a problem that I really deeply understand. And so that was where I started looking at the old school industries, and more importantly, the consumer experiences that were full of friction. And they go hand in hand because technology is a way to remove the friction, oftentimes. And then the why now was this is 2013, and what was happening was Uber and Lyft were becoming very popular. The iPhone was ubiquitous, and consumers were kind of in a mindset of, hey, I'm going to press a button on my phone and something's going to happen. It's going to be the remote control of my life. And so there was a nice intersection there of this is the time where there's actually an opportunity to bring technology to some of these old school service industries and transform them. And that's where James, as the missing piece there, when he came in with the idea of dry cleaning, I hadn't thought about dry cleaning, but when he said it was just kind of perfectly fit within what I was looking for. And that's where the conversation got really exciting. I had looked at different ideas. I mean, some of the ideas came to fruition from someone else, but I wasn't excited. Like gas delivery, pizza delivery, being an assistant and helping you out. There's a number of ideas that I just couldn't get past like week 2 or 3 or 4 because I just wasn't fired up about it. And all the pieces had to come into place. And that's what, the bells went off when the pieces kind of came into place.
And I'm so glad they did, like you said, about time saving for the average consumer and that being a trend. Rinse saved my life. Actually, I don't know if you knew I was an early customer of yours. So Rinse saved my life back in the mid 2010s while I was at ESPN and then traveling so much for work. I didn't have time. I was barely home long enough to sit and go down to the basement and do my wash and then wait and come back up. So, oh my gosh, Rinse was amazing. I highly recommend the service to every single person listening. But I would love to point on one more thing that you said before we keep moving forward on your journey. So you said that you knew that James was the person that you wanted to co-found with. And as we both know, one of the biggest reasons that businesses fail is co-founders. So what about James did you see and know from that friendship that were signals to you that this was a great potential partner to bring in to the future of your journey?
Well, interestingly, prior to that conversation with James, my exploration was kind of all over the map. I was looking at ideas I would start. I was talking to people who were going to start ideas, and I was also talking to people who already had ideas but were looking for a CEO to come in. And through that exploration, I got data points of where am I excited, where do I want to play, and I had gotten great advice. Again, I got a lot of advice from mentors that just sticks with me, but the best decisions are made when you can weigh them against attractive alternatives. And so I was trying to see all different types of options for me. And around the time James appeared with the idea of dry cleaning, I had come to the conclusion that I wanted to start this with someone because I had not started a company on my own before and I wanted to be on that journey. And James actually happened to be, at the time, he's a healthcare guy. He was working in healthcare investing. and he wanted to start a company too. And so he was actually, we were actually talking to each other on a regular basis about kind of sharing ideas and being each other's sounding board. He was giving me some ideas he was working on the healthcare side. I was giving him consumer ideas. And I remember talking to literally the night before I had brunch with James, where he brought up the idea of dry cleaning. I was talking to my wife about another startup where a person had asked me to be their co-founder. And we were kind of talking about pros and cons and am I excited or not? And ultimately, I found myself kind of trying to justify it as opposed to being like, yeah, this is definitely it. And I told my wife that night, I was like, who'd be a great co-founder? Boy, James would be a great co-founder, but he's a healthcare guy and I don't want to do healthcare. And lo and behold, the next day he brings up this idea. And ultimately to your question, I had never worked with James, right? We had to develop our working relationship. In fact, once we started, we went through a series of questions about how would we work together and, what makes you tick and all that. But I had known him for so long as a person of high integrity, of strong character. And I knew going into it, I just trusted him implicitly and explicitly. And that to me was super important because, again, the journey is so hard and there's so many ups and downs. If you're going to do it with someone, you want to know that they're going to be there when things go wrong or things go sideways. And that was the thing I knew going into it with James, was that I trusted him implicitly and explicitly, and I knew that he would be there through the thick and the thin. And that was a very strong foundational starting point for us as we went on the journey.
And then where do you go from there?
Well, then, so it's a lot like a marriage. I will tell you, I got married actually the same year we started Rinse. And so I've been building the family and the company at the same time. But it is a lot like a marriage where, okay, we know that this is a good fit. We feel really good about this. We're both really excited. There was a lot of communication early on before we even started serving customers, around the time of incorporating and like kind of building this, going through a lot of questions of, what's your working style? How long can you go without taking a salary? What are your expectations for this? Does this have to be a unicorn in 3 years, or do you want to build this long term? Like all these just 35, 40 questions we kind of went over. I remember we went to James's parents' house and we were just sitting there going through these over a series of a couple of days. So it's a starting point, but then I think it's constant work. Marriage is constant work. A co-founder relationship is constant work. You have to communicate. You have to work well together. James and I have different working styles. We have different communication styles. We have different levels of comfort with conflict. All of those sorts of things came into play early on when we were working together. And the way we've been able to build a really successful partnership over 12 years has been constant communication. And we brought on a third co-founder, August 2013, Sam, our CTO, and he's been with us for 12 years. And in order for us to work really well together, we have to communicate with each other. We have to create, a safe space for us to talk openly. And that is extended to the whole company. Actually, like the culture is one where we focus a lot on psychological safety. People can take risks. People should make their voice heard. And it's translated to really strong retention. Like our top 10 senior leaders at Rinse have over 70 years of experience at Rinse, right? We've worked together so long and we've got to know each other so well, but that doesn't happen unless there's a lot of communication, psychological safety, a culture where people are respected, where people can, they can kind of bring their whole self to work and be authentic. And so all that takes a lot of work. I've seen it in my role as the CEO. My number one job is to make sure there's cash in the bank. And certainly at times that is a all-encompassing job. But after that, it's about building a great culture and a place that people want to come work.
So at the start of all of this, did you think when you and James were mapping this out in his parents' house that it would be a 12-year process, or how did you see it then? And then how can you share a little bit about what the growth has looked like over these last 12 years for those listening before we kind of jump more into that culture element that you've been teasing out?
Yeah. There's no way I could tell you that at the time we started, I knew that 12 years later, I'd still be doing this. I'd still be excited about it. I'd still be building it. James would still be there. Like that would have been very hard to predict. 12 years is such a long time in the life of a startup. And so, but I had people tell me, hey, that the whole idea of like being excited early is that you need to be ready for a long journey. Like a 10 to 15 year journey. People have said that to me and I was kind of like, yeah, right. 10 to 15 years. That's crazy. And now I'm in it. I'm like, yeah, okay, that was good advice. So, that I think the way the journey has gone, the constant has been, I'm always sort of calibrating and recalibrating on how excited am I? Am I learning? Is this the right role for me? Am I the right person for this role? And those are things that I kind of check on, at least every 6 to 12 months. And actually, I'm constantly recalibrating. There's a nice framework of, are you good tired or bad tired? And so, like, when you're bad tired, it's time to move on. But good tired is okay, because I might be working hard, but I'm still jumping out of bed and ready to tackle the next problem. And so, if you think about the growth at Rinse, it's been a really interesting journey over 12 years. One of the key things about this business is that it's super operationally complex. And so the barriers to entry are really low. Actually, James and I ran a first test a week or two after we started talking about the idea. So it's very easy to do someone's laundry. The barriers to scale are really high because there's so much operational complexity to manage the logistics piece of this, pickup and delivery, manage the cleaning piece, put it all together, and orchestrate it, day in and day out. And so when we started in 3 zip codes in San Francisco. And we said, hey, let's prove it out here before we go anywhere else. And we started by, we signed up 11 people. And then a month later, we added another 7 of friends, and then another 7 or 8, we're just kind of slowly doing it, but testing out the operational complexity and making sure we could manage it, making sure the response was positive. And then, in our early days, we launched zip code by zip code. That's how we expanded. 3 zip codes in San Francisco. We added the Mission. We added North Beach. We kept moving around to the point until we had the whole city. We also started only serving customers Sunday and Wednesday. And once we got comfortable, about a year or so in, we added Monday, Thursday. And then we added Tuesday, Friday, and then we made it 7 days a week. But it was very methodical and very intentional because we knew operations was the hard part here. The part to solve for was, how do you scale this and manage that operational complexity and maintain quality? And so that's been, kind of an important piece of the journey. Early on, when we used to do strategy sessions, or we'd get together and talk about, like, hey, what's the next, thing we got to figure out? We would say, okay, tonight we have 50 stops tonight. Okay, well, what happens when we have 100? Where do we break? Okay, let's figure out how to do that. What happens then when you get to 100 stops? Like, okay, what happens when you get to 200? Where do we break? So early on, a lot of it was like, okay, as we scale, how do you make sure you're managing the complexity? And the growth clip was, in parallel, as we got better on managing the operations and started bringing more technology, we raised capital. And so, we started with the Friends and Family round. We raised a seed round in 2014, a Series A in 2015, a B in 2017. And with capital came expansion. We launched Los Angeles in 2015, Washington, D.C. in 2016, Chicago and Boston in 2018. And so the growth clip was early on was, kind of very maybe as expected. You raise money, you invest in growth, you build the team out, you kind of figure out how to scale things. We hit a point in 2019 where we were growing at a really, healthy clip, but we were burning a lot of cash. We hadn't spent enough time, kind of ensuring the economics were working and ready for that level of spend. And so, I was unable to raise the Series C at the time. And so in 2019, we actually had to do some layoffs, cut costs, increase prices, figure out ways to navigate and really focus on the economics. And we navigated a very tough year in 2019 where we were able to make a lot of progress. And actually a lot of that work was really valuable because March 2020, while we were marching to profitability, COVID hit. And we lost 40% of revenue overnight because people stopped dry cleaning and events stopped happening and weddings stopped happening and all that. And so then for a couple of years, we were navigating COVID, but we were really well positioned given, how lean the team was and, how bought in everybody was to what we were doing. And we were able to navigate that and put ourselves in a position of strength and a position to play offense when everyone else was playing defense. And we raised capital coming out of it. And then we've been back on a growth path where we launched New York, we launched Austin, Dallas, Seattle, New Jersey, and we're really investing in the original vision of being a household name, being the category leader, being a national and global brand. And so we're back on that path and really doubling down there.
A lot of ups and downs you just mentioned, and you've talked about the importance of founder psyche. How do you personally maintain a mindset of growth and resilience?
It's interesting because I think the answer is just have the growth mindset. That's the idea. I think we have a mantra of continuous improvement. at Rinse, and I have I view everything as a opportunity for growth. There's another mentor of mine would always say, when you're in a tough situation, she calls it a fog, another effing opportunity for growth. It's like you can put anything into a bucket of, hey, I'm going to grow coming out of this. This might be hard, but I'm going to grow. But I think it also ultimately ties back to the idea of bounce back ability that I mentioned earlier, where, my mom, one of my favorite quotes from my mom, is she always says, it's not about the what if, it's about the what now. So it's not about how I got here, what could I have done differently? I am here and I control how I react. I control how we move forward. And so anytime we have run into issues, it's very easy to feel like you're a victim of circumstance. I mean, we could have easily said, we just navigated one of the toughest years ever in 2019 and somehow put ourselves in a path to profitability. And then all of a sudden COVID hit, and like, what? We could have easily taken a more of a victim mindset, but the reality was we were going to keep going. We're going to keep pushing. And so it's not the what if, it's the what now. You have to keep moving forward. You have to be thinking about, how do we navigate this challenge ahead of us? And so I think that mindset, I think I've had it probably infused in me since I was a kid, but it's just, nothing's going to get in our way. There might be a wall in front of us, but as an entrepreneur, you're just going to keep running through walls. That is the job of the entrepreneur, because they're going to keep showing up. And I think one anecdote from COVID was, when we were deep in COVID, and it was kind of like staring the potential outcomes of this situation right in the face. I had a friend of mine who was also a founder of like an e-commerce startup, and he was also dealing with his own struggles, and he texted me a GIF of the Juggernaut, just like on repeat, endless loop of the Juggernaut running through walls, and it was the perfect description of what you navigate as an entrepreneur. And so I think that mindset is core to, COVID is an extreme, but that sort of challenge, you're facing that all the time on this journey.
One of the things I want to talk about with your service specifically, so in an industry where there's a lot of competition for services with consumers, so many different ways to get to people's eyeballs, something that I want to point out that you did really uniquely was you are the only founder that I joined Rinse in 2015 in LA. And I remember getting a letter from you back in the early days that was like, you remember when that tech came out that was like faked your handwriting so that it looked, I'm dating myself now, but it looked like somebody handwritten a note. Yeah. Do you remember sending those out?
Yeah. We used to do
for feedback.
Yeah.
And that has stuck with me all these years in terms of a way to personally connect with and ask for feedback from consumers in a way that other companies weren't doing. And it felt so personal at the time. And I know that now that's something that many in the market have done now for a long time. But what are the what has been your approach to all of these little personal touches and the things that have really stood out to acquire and maintain long-term customers?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, I mean, first, just like from a founder perspective, I think, it is hard for me not to always be thinking about what we're doing and what we're building and how can we be better and how can we improve it. And we've always had a philosophy, our number one core value is the customer is the North Star. We're always thinking about the customer experience, trying to put ourselves in the customer's shoes, and also having a philosophy of feedback is a gift, and we want feedback from our customers. Feedback is data. And so, we did those handwritten notes. We've also, even to today, if you signed up today, you get a direct email from me to welcome you from my email address, from ajay@rinse.com. So you can email me directly with questions. And for me, like, I still stay pretty close to our customer care team. I spend time with the leadership every week, talking through what do we go through that week? How can we improve? Are we staying true to our philosophy of taking care of the customer, making sure they feel heard and respected, but really addressing their needs? I think that has been infused in the mindset at Rinse, this customer philosophy. And so, like, I think that is a super important thing when you think about how do you grow the business and how do you scale a brand, or how do you like get more customers to come? Because when we started, we were not flashy. And I don't think we're flashy today either, but like we definitely didn't think about, hey, we have to have the best mobile app or we have to get all the PR or any of that. We were just like, let's let's not worry about how many customers come in the door. Let's worry about when they do come in the door, they have an amazing experience. Let's make sure they have an amazing experience and they keep coming back, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a long-term partnership with our customer. We're not trying to make this transactional. And there were touches along the way. Like when we started, we were actually primarily SMS based. At the time, nobody used SMS. No companies use SMS. And what we said was, that's a medium where you talk to your friends and you talk to your family. And so let's use SMS and not make you find this on some app, within like the million apps on your phone or anything like that, or not make every message sound transactional, but make it sound like a conversation, because we're working with you long term. This isn't a one-time deal. We want to stick with you a long time. And I think a lot of the things we built into the experience was with that long-term partnership in mind. We don't want this to just be a one-time thing where we never see you again. We want to keep building, because this is a recurring need for you. It's a universal need. And we want to be the ultimate convenience for people with busy lives, right? We want to make sure that we're taking this thing off your plate. We're working in the background. It happens magically. You don't have to ever worry about it. And it was interesting because when we started too, a lot of people were like, oh yeah, man, you're going to get so many customers who are so lazy that they're going to let you do the laundry. Well, no, we're not going after lazy. We're going after super busy, because everybody has to do it. And I want you to feel that relief of like, oh, thank God, Rinse is here. They took care of it. And so I think that mindset has been, that's just been constant. And we think about it with how we show up for the customer, how accessible we are, how responsive we are, hopefully how we deliver clean clothes. And our valets, even all of our valets have been W-2 employees since the beginning. We train them, they're wearing a uniform. They're all friendly. They're professional. We get a lot of feedback from customers about how much they love our valets. And you know what? When you take care of the valets, when we employ them, when we treat them with respect, when we build a community for them, we get a lot of retention. We get people who stick around a long time. We've had valets who've driven with Rinse for many years, many, many thousands of routes. And, that just makes the customer experience better, because they know the answers. You might have seen them before. You might already know them, so those little touches are all super important to build this great experience.
You are an angel investor, advisor, and mentor to founders and startup teams, and you lecture in management for Startup Garage, one of the Stanford Graduate School of Business's most popular classes on entrepreneurship. So let's use Rinse as the case study for a second. What are the best decisions you've made that you recommend to other founders?
Well, it's a great question, and I would say there's not one that would stick out. I think it's the approach we've taken that has worked really well for us, and actually is very aligned with how the Startup Garage teaches the path. So the first thing is to be needs focused and solution agnostic, and that is the fall term of Startup Garage. If anyone ends up going to Stanford Business School and taking that class, is focused on need finding and really understanding the customer. And so if you think about with Rinse, what we did was we took a customer development approach. We didn't sit back and say, this is a cool idea, let's spend months developing it. James and I were out 1 to 2 weeks later, actually running a test with 11 of our friends, picking up their clothes, cleaning them, delivering them back, putting a stake in the ground of what we thought this could look like, and then getting feedback. And then once we got really positive signals, we took the next step of need finding and talking to as many people as we could. And if you think about that from our early decision-making, we were launching Rinse at a time when everybody was on demand. And I talked to so many investors and really smart founders that I have a ton of respect for, and they all said we had to be on demand. We had to be on demand 24/7. That's where the world was going. And it was great advice, except for the customers weren't saying that. The customers would tell a story about the last time they did dry cleaning, and they would be like, oh, I'll take care. It's in my closet. I'll take care of it later. Like, oh shoot, I got to go to the dry cleaner to pick it up. I'll go next week. It was signals of like, you don't need this done right now. You need this just done well. And it was this idea of, okay, Uber solves this acute pain point. You need a taxi, you need a ride, you need it now. Makes total sense to be on demand. We're solving a chronic pain point. You always need your clothes cleaned. You always need them taken care of. On demand's not the answer. Consistency and reliability is the answer. But we wouldn't have got there if we weren't super needs focused and solution agnostic and not focused on customer development. And that's one of the biggest things we teach at the Startup Garage, which is you got to get outside the building. You got to get outside your bubble. If you're going to build a company, you got to go talk to people who are potentially your end customers. You got to talk to people who don't know you and actually get feedback. You got to put stuff in front of them and test it out and learn. And so we've had that mentality since the beginning, do the things that don't scale, find out where the signals are, where this is actually worth building, and then scale it. And I think that has been really, really important in terms of our decision making and as part of that, our intentionality since the beginning of kind of building this brick by brick is very consistent with any advice I give to founders and what we teach at the Startup Garage, which is getting the signals, putting the pieces in place, and focusing on the things that are most important. So for Rinse, it was actually really different than our competitors at the time when we just focused on the operations and we focused on execution. From my perspective, it's a service-based business. That's won and lost through execution. That starts and ends with the team, with analytical rigor, with kind of being methodical on a daily basis and putting the pieces in place to navigate the operational complexity. We had competitors who started around the same time that raised a lot more money, that got a lot more PR, that had a nicer app. We didn't even really build our mobile app until like 3 years in. These are things where we were very intentional, but it was also based on, not necessarily following the hype, not necessarily like listening to, kind of the people who are smart about startups, but not necessarily our customers, but really thinking about our customers and developing for them.
What decisions at Rinse would you not repeat and why?
Well, I mean, I've made a lot of mistakes, and I think, there's a number I could point to. Probably the one that sticks out is I mentioned in 2019 we had to do layoffs. And so if you work backwards to how we got there, we raised a Series B, a $15 million Series B in 2017. And the approach we took was, we had a lot of money. Let's build out our team. Let's build out a leadership team. Let's invest in growth. Let's launch 2 more markets. We launched Chicago and Boston. And we took all of the steps that, we would take as a growing, scaling business that was obviously going to raise more money as we went. And, what happened was we built a pretty top-heavy team. The expense was not necessarily, aligned with where we were from a scale standpoint or how much we'd actually learned as a business in terms of where we needed to go. We launched those 2 markets when we probably weren't ready to launch 2 markets. And we spent a lot of money on marketing, and we didn't actually fix the underlying unit economics. Our economics were good. We wouldn't have been able to raise a Series A or Series B if our economics weren't better than everyone else we were competing against. And so they were good, but they weren't good enough to justify that level of spend. And so, ultimately we were forced to cut, 20 plus jobs. We were forced to navigate that and, increase prices on customers and make these decisions that we should have made earlier. But, I think the big lesson I had, I say this a lot internally, is that you have to fix the roof while the sun's still shining. We were forced to make these decisions when it was raining and we were like, oh God, we have holes in our roof. We got to go do this. But had I been a better leader at the time and kind of had that experience, we would not have gotten to the position where we had to lay people off. I think we could have increased prices with a lot of money in the bank. We could have made these decisions on what improves economics from a position of strength. And so one of the things that we've done since, as we've raised capital, is we fix the roof while the sun's still shining. We will make decisions that are better for the business while we have, the capital, so that if it's the wrong move, we can always undo it. We have plenty of space to undo it. Jeff Bezos talks about one-way doors and two-way doors. Most things are two-way doors. You can go back. And so, I think that's probably the mistake I made. That it's all, interestingly, it's also probably in the journey of Rinse, a really important mistake that was made, because it's made us so much stronger. It's made the culture so much better. The layoffs were hard, but the day after was harder. I had to face the team and kind of talk about what just happened and why did we get there and how did I fail you? But then also talk to them about where we're going and why should you trust me still? And so, it really took our level of transparency as a culture to the next level. We were already very transparent, but it was like an insane level of transparency, like talking about cash and talking about all of the things. And I think that's a reason we have had such good retention, right? We have many of our senior leaders were there before those layoffs and are stuck around through COVID and are still there now. But I think, our culture became even stronger navigating those challenging times.
I want to talk about the psychological safety component, but first I want to touch on the humanness of going through laying off 20 people who have been riding with you. And like you said, it's the day after that's the hardest. What skills and methods did you implement for yourself mentally to go through that bounceability quickly and keep moving?
Yeah, I mean, I had never had to go through that in the past. And so first thing I did was talk to others who had navigated it and kind of understood what did they go through? What were the important steps? And so there's a little bit of like understanding, okay, tactically, we got to choreograph. Layoffs are challenging, and you actually have to choreograph them and do them well so that everyone is treated with respect, exits gracefully. It's done, kind of with precision because you don't let it stretch out over time. So that in itself took a lot of work. But really for the next day, I think it was more just understanding that it's not about the tactical. It's not like what you can do. It's just how you show up. And, for me, I think it was uh, just being honest with, how we got there and how I was feeling. And, I think the vulnerability and the humility of just like, this is who I am. It's core to our culture. It's core to psychological safety, actually. You have to be able to just show up as you are. And so the next day, I think the challenge was really the idea of, hey, like we just laid off your friends, people that you've been working with and you've been in the trenches with and, got to happy hours with and all that sort of stuff. And so, it would be natural to put yourself in their shoes and say, wow, why should they believe me? Now I just, look what I just did. Look where I just got us, where I just led us to. And so I think to me, it was, I think just kind of bringing my honest feelings to the table and being very open and transparent about how we got there and how we were going to keep moving forward. And I will say, I am an optimist. Optimism's a force multiplier in a number of ways. And, like none of these challenges have been ones that have gotten me to a point where I don't think we can overcome them. Right. I think living by it's not the what if, it's the what now mentality is like, I'm not going to fall victim to circumstance in any situation. And so I was being very honest with the team when I talked about where I think we're going and how I think we're going to get there. But I think the commitment I made to the team was a kind of like a extreme level of transparency of like, this is exactly what led us to here. This is what we need to accomplish. Here's what the different steps we are taking are going to help us accomplish. And I'm going to keep reporting back to you guys and hold myself accountable and hold the leadership team accountable to actually following through on this sort of stuff. And I'm going to keep you apprised of the whole situation. But, as part of that, I'm going to tell you a story about where I think we're going. And it's going to be optimistic because I believe in it. And so, I think that is part of the, not necessarily like I didn't have any experience doing that specific thing. I think it was just kind of bringing my whole self to that situation and just being open and transparent with everybody.
It's amazing that you've been able to maintain, and it's a testament to the culture that you've created, that you've been able to maintain so many key hires for this long. Like you said, a combined 70 years of experience at Rinse. What are the rituals and practices that you follow week in and week out as a company to create that psychological safety internally?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because culture certainly evolves as the company evolves. And I think, when you start a company, there's the old adage that culture comes from the top, and that's certainly true. But, what I found is early on, as you bring on more people, culture is going to take a life of its own, and you have to hope you infuse it with the right kind of foundational values. So I would say it starts with the core values of the business. I actually, I wrote our core values I remember on a flight in 2013 in the early days, and James and I kind of iterated on them, and they've stuck for 12 years. But those core values are not only things that can guide you through challenging times, but also, you use them to build a team and to make sure this is how we want to carry ourselves. And so a couple of them, the two that I'll point out, one is make mom proud, which was an ode to James's mom, who helped us a lot early on. But it's the idea that everything we do, we should be proud to tell our mom about. And it's an important distinction I make with every new hire is that it's not that we should be okay if mom found out. We should be proud to tell her about it, which means that we're carrying ourselves in a certain way that is representative of who we are, who she would want us to be, and who the brand wants to be. And then another one is embracing change and ambiguity, which I think is really important in a startup because things change all the time. And, as an example, you might think you're about to be profitable, and then COVID will hit and you're like, oh, we have to adjust. But we've had a number of examples along the way where, you just have to embrace change. You have to move quickly, and you just have to handle the situation. And I like to say that our team is exceptional in exceptional circumstances. I mean, the team always shows up when they have to. But those core values have been core to everything we've done as we built Rinse. And then when you think about the rituals, first, it's who you bring onto the team, like who gets a seat on the bus. And one thing that we have done is that I am the final round interview for every new hire who is a salaried hire. And James is the final round interview for every hourly hire. So if you are going to join the Rinse team, you're going to spend time with one of us at least, and oftentimes both of us. And that's an important piece of the puzzle, because we want to make sure that we are bringing people who are a good fit for the culture, a good fit for the core values, and they're going to be set up for success here. But then after that, it's like, how do you create the conditions for people to grow and people to thrive and people to feel psychologically safe? And I will say, like, I spend a disproportionate amount of time thinking about that and being involved in that. And part of it is with, the hiring process. Part of it is with checking in with people. Part of it is, how do you show up in meetings? How do you show up in Slack? We're a very open, transparent culture. You can be here day one and you can see a debate between me and James or me and Sam in an open public channel, and it's totally fine. You could come in and be very junior and have an idea, and you could see it being accepted immediately and change is happening. There's no egos in the room. It's open. We encourage risk taking. I love when people share half-baked ideas, because we iterate faster then. And I found people will come in sometimes and they're not used to that. And so they hold back, and the feedback has to be, no, actually, we didn't bring you on to not hear your voice. Like, we want to hear your voice. That's why you're on the team. But I think it is through kind of daily reinforcement of just, how do we show up? How do I show up? How does James show up? How does Sam show up? How does the senior leadership team show up? And then, like, you keep moving, through the organization. And that consistency is super important. And so, I mean, I think about this a lot, because it's so important. I think it's the reason, my job is to enable everybody else. My job is to accelerate progress through, on the initiatives we're working on. And one of the ways I enable is by ensuring this culture of psychological safety and making sure that you can show up and you can do your best work and, be okay taking risks.
It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And I appreciate how open you are to your thought process behind creating that culture, because I think that this is a theme that needs more discussion and conversation, especially on social media. So thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so for anybody that is listening right now and not watching the video version, definitely tune in. But Ajay has a bunch of beautiful art pieces behind him that have been done, I would assume, by your children.
Yeah.
And a really cool fun fact about his journey is that Ajay has actually built a family alongside building Rinse. And I know there are many people who are looking at that balancing act, but how has your approach to work-life integration changed as since you have become a parent?
Yeah, I mean, I started Rinse in early 2013, and I got married June 2013. And interestingly, my oldest daughter, who's now 10, was born 3 days after we closed our seed round in late 2014. And so, the journey has been very much kind of in parallel. It's really interesting, because I think, like I mentioned, prior to startups, I always worked in jobs where I worked long hours, and I could always crank and just, I don't go late nights and then wake up early and get back at it and keep working. And I think kids are an amazing regulator of your schedule, because, the most important thing to do is spend time with them, and they don't really care if you're working on something important or you have a deadline. And so, what I think family has done for me is not only like put the startup journey into very clear perspective of how unimportant it is relative to more important things like family, but also it's really made me even more ruthless with my time. Really, really important to prioritize time, make sure you're only working on things that move the needle, engineer my calendar so that I am it is set to not only maximize time with family, with my wife and kids, but also that when I'm working on things that are the most important, it's aligned with my most productive time, or time when I'm not going to get distracted or have to go do school pickup or drop off or things like that. So, over the course of time, I've had to get better at how I work. One of my jobs in my role is I have to scale myself faster than the company. And so as the company has grown, even though I've had the same title, what I've had to do has changed and evolved. And so I have to always be growing and learning. And kids are like an accelerant to that, because I'm growing as a parent. I'm learning how to take care of them. And that's a more important job than what I'm doing here. And so I have to find the balance. So I would say, like, the biggest thing it's done is it's just like, it's kept me grounded in what I'm doing. I think startups are challenging in that, they're all encompassing. And if you gave it 24 hours a day, the startup would take it in a heartbeat. And so, like, kids are just like the best blocker to that, because, like, no, you cannot take all of my time, because I have to spend most of my time with them. So I think that is probably the biggest, is just like regulating my schedule. Certainly challenging though. And boy, if you think about how you have to manage your psyche through the startup journey, it's hard enough just within the startup in a vacuum. But then when you layer on external things like building a family and having kids and health and other, financial constraints and other things that can happen as you're doing it, it's even harder. And so, just that resilience, that managing your psyche, that bounce back ability, that becomes really, really important, so that you can show up. For me, it's like I want to show up in the best way possible for my kids, and so I can't let the stress or challenges of a startup get in the way of that.
Speaking to always improving yourself and having a busy schedule, what does the more tactical practice of continuous learning look like in your life? And how do you prioritize that every week, every month, and so on?
Continuous learning comes in different formats, right? Whether it's talking to others, having advisors. I've been working with an executive coach for the past 2 years, which has been great. And I hadn't done that in the first 10 years of the journey, but that's been great. Uh, Podcasts, articles, books, anything where more information can come, and kind of nuggets of wisdom can kind of change how I think. But probably more importantly, it's less about the source of the information. I think it's more about how do you process the information. And so for me, I think one thing I've done over the years is I'm at the point where I incorporate learnings and feedback real time. Right? There's no like, this is going to take me a month to try to incorporate this into my practice. If it's a good idea, I incorporate it real time, and I continue to move, and I'm always sort of recalibrating. And I think part of that is related to, even at Rinse, I'm always kind of recalibrating the idea of embracing change and ambiguity. If the right answer is different than where we're going, we need to change quickly. And so the ability to move very quickly when you know the answer is differentiating for any sort of startup founder. I think it's also differentiating for individuals. Like, just, hey, I know that this is in the right direction. This is a better direction. I'm going this way. I hear a quote that can change how I think about things, or open up the aperture a bit more. I'm gonna soak that in, and let that change how I think. So I think that's been a big piece of it. Tactically, also, part of this is creating the conditions so that that can happen. And so, I think that comes with managing your schedule a lot, because when you're in a role where, especially as your company's growing, there's a lot of opportunity to spend your time on things in different ways. And we have this prioritization framework at Rinse that I use in my life, which is, it's either a hell yes or it's a no, right? Like, if it's not obviously I should do this, then we don't do it, or I don't do it. And, like, if I put it, thinking about a startup, if you have a lot of people who are in their early stages of starting a company, one thing that happens when you are the CEO of a company and you're on LinkedIn, or you have a funding announcement or whatever, is you get a lot of invitations to dinners and networking events and things like that. And this is one minor example, but I've said no to those forever. I don't go to those because, they all sound cool, but they're not moving the needle, and they're not a hell yes. They're like a nice to have. And so I think being super ruthless with where am I going to invest my time is important, and then constantly recalibrating that, and then really managing your energy so that you can always bring your best self to those hours that you're working, so that they're as productive as possible, because it all ties together. if I don't bring my best self to those hours, then I'm not going to bring my best self to the hours of my family. And so like my day at this point, 12 years in now, is kind of dialed down to the minute, honestly. And I think tactically it's about recalibrating how it's dialed in to make sure that it's actually in service of what I need to be doing for Rinse and for my family.
Ajay, you are such a thoughtful wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for making the time today to join us on Confessions of a Founder. We've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you think would be good for the audience to know about?
Thanks for having me. It's a great discussion. It's always fun to talk about these sorts of topics. I mean, I think, for me, if just generally speaking on the founder's journey, I'll just reiterate how important it is to manage your psyche, how important it is to go in eyes wide open and know that it is going to be challenging and there are ways to navigate that. I would also say an important thing is to be open to asking for help, because it is, I think I have found, as I've talked to a lot of early stage founders, there's kind of a general mentality of, I'm not supposed to ask for help. I'm supposed to be able to do this. Like, I'm going to build this. I'm going to make this happen. And the reality is that all these great companies that get somewhere is that the founders or the people building it, they're asking for help all the time and they're getting help all the time. And the reality is that founders who've built really want to help others and they want to help you navigate and like save time from all the mistakes that they've made. And so I would say just being open to asking for help and, learning from others' mistakes. It's going to help you on your journey. Anything you can do to reduce the load and the burden of what's already a very challenging journey, you should do. And so I think that is, I'll leave people at that, but I think it's, at the end of the day, it is a very exciting and rewarding journey. I've loved it. But it takes work and it takes kind of constant nurturing.
Plug yourself. What's next for Rinse?
Rinse is continuing its journey to be, a household name and really kind of the dominant brand in this category nationally and globally. We just closed a Series D at the end of 2024. Which is super exciting. We are continuing to grow within the United States, our core business of pickup and delivery of dry cleaning and laundry, but we are also really focusing on broadening to powering all of laundry outside of the home. Not only does that mean, growing the business and expanding to more markets in the US, we're also, going to launch Toronto later this year. So we'll be going to Canada. We're looking at, acquiring and moving into having laundromats and dry cleaners. There's a lot of exciting things we're doing to basically influence all of laundry outside of the home. So I'm fired up. I'm a very good tired these days because there's so much we're doing that's really, really exciting. And putting ourselves in a position where we have enough capital to make really smart long-term bets that are better for the business and will get us to that next level is a really, really fun place to be. So that's where we are right now.
Where can the audience find you?
Rinse, you can check out Rinse at rinse.com. Obviously you can go in the App Store as well and get the mobile app. And we're on social media and for me, I'm, on LinkedIn, I guess you could find me and, connect with me if you ever have questions, and Ajay at rinse.com. I'll put it out there.
Ajay, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you on. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Confessions of a Founder. It's because of listeners like you that this show has grown so rapidly. I look forward to continuing season 2 next Tuesday and every Tuesday here on out. So be sure to listen in for incredible guests, big names, and successful entrepreneurs. Until next Tuesday, keep kicking.